All right, now I am on stage to introduce the wonderful women next to me. First, Suzy Welch. Suzy is an award-winning NYU Stern School of Business professor, a tech entrepreneur, and a 3-time New York Times best-selling author known for her warmth and wisdom around business and culture. Over the course of her long and multifaceted career, Suzy has worked as a crime reporter in Miami, a consultant at Bain & Co., and a columnist for O, the Oprah magazine. A graduate of Harvard University, and Harvard Business School, she has been and remains a frequent guest of the Today Show and an op-ed contributor to the Wall Street Journal. She is here with us today to discuss her acclaimed new book, Becoming You, a proven method for crafting your authentic life and career. Suzy will be in conversation with Linda Henry, the CEO and co-owner of Boston Globe Media and a member of the Nantucket Book Festival Planning Committee. Please join me in a warm welcome for Linda and Suzy.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Suzy. You are such a rock star, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with you again.
You are the rock
Suzy
star.
and I are friends, and we've had a very similar conversation to this, so this is going to be really fun because I know where the good stuff is. And I want to start by saying that this is just so wonderful to be in community with all of you. I think I joined the Nantucket Book Festival, and it is a group of such passionate, dedicated individuals who are friends and neighbors who are just want to bring the literary world here alive on Nantucket year-round. And you guys showing up and being part of it means so much. So thank you very much for being here. This is wonderful. And so Suzy, who she mentioned that she had 3 best-selling books prior to this one, which has already been on best-selling lists, so we can update your bio to say 4. Yeah. You wrote one of your books here on Nantucket.
Yes, I did. And I wrote portions of this book on Nantucket. I wrote Becoming You on Nantucket last summer, or was it the summer before? It all blends together. I have to write a book that's due August 1st. I plan to finish it in Nantucket this summer. Please pray for me. And winning one of the books that I wrote with my husband, Jack, I wrote on Nantucket.
Did you write 10-10-10 here too?
That was 15 years ago. You're taxing me here.
I remember talking to you being like, I
think
can't come out to play.
Yes, that's basically the last 20 years of my life. I can't come out to play.
So Nantucket's been a really beautiful part of your life and your career in terms of your success, because this has been your beautiful writing home.
Thank you. I actually have a memory about writing in Nantucket. I don't think I've ever told this story anywhere because only people in Nantucket would understand this story. You get up and you write, and you've got your keyboard on your desk, and it's morning, and what happens? The keys start sticking because it's Nantucket and there's fog. And so I actually had a blow dryer plugged in next to the computer, and I would blow the keyboard so that the keys would go without sticking. Then I'd write for a little while, and then the keys would start sticking again, and I'd get out the blow dryer. That is the ultimate Nantucket writing story.
That is a great Nantucket writing
Before we had air conditioning, then we got air conditioning so this would stop.
Oh, good solution.
Yep.
So you've had an incredible career, and before the pandemic, you were very much a tech entrepreneur. And you've always sort of had this ability to communicate, to talk to people, to write, and you've sort of kept that thing alive. You've pivoted in such a remarkable way, and sort of found you asked yourself a question in terms of what you were going to be doing. Can you talk to us about that pivot that got you to this place where you are now, your life purpose, which you are living so beautifully, is helping all of us find our life purpose?
Yeah. I wish that I could say that I thought it all and it was very well planned out, but it, like all things in life, it kind of unfolded with a lot of serendipity.
A friend of mine has a saying that everything makes sense in reverse.
Yes, and I am case in point. But I did have, I know there's a lot of love for Jack in this room, and so I can speak about him, and I think most people here are familiar with him, and I know there's many of his friends here. So I was working with Jack for many years, and that was a wonderful life. And very unfortunately, Jack got ill, and we had the euphemism, we ran out of options, and he passed away on March 1st, 2020. And the pandemic hit on kind of March 15th, 2020. And so I knew I was going to the woods after he died anyway, and then we all picked up and went to the woods together. And I had refused, before Jack died, to engage with him in an exercise that he wanted to engage in, which was to talk about my life after he died. And he would say, let's talk about what you're going to do. And I'd be like, I'm not having that conversation with you because I'm going to have magical thinking, and it's not ever going to happen. And so I didn't have that conversation with him, and I wish I had, because he would have had so much insight and knowledge, but he was gone, and I had not had it with him. And then I was sort of with the rest of the world, sort of being turned upside down by the pandemic. And I was in the woods with my kids, and I was thinking, what will I do? What will I do? And it was a really big question. Like, what will I do? Not just work-wise, but what will I do without him? I mean, it was a lot of stuff at once. I'm not the only person who's gone through loss, so I'm not trying to portray that I am. So but then the pandemic started to wane, and my kids started going away. And so all the things, the momentum I had, which were my adult children and their partners and their dogs, all left me up in the woods. And I was like, now I've got to get serious. And very serendipitously, at that moment, the Today Show, thank God, called and said, will you come back? So I went back on the Today Show, and I remember as I was driving into the city thinking, my heart was pounding, like, oh, this is actually good. I'm going back to work. So this was the beginning of it, work. And I thought, then I went into the studio, and I was like, oh, I love this. I love this. I love being back. But then on air, Hoda Kotb said to me, Suzy Welch, will you come back? And like, I've seen the video of me going, yes, but my face was like, I was thinking, no, because I couldn't, I was a different person. But I then thought, okay, I know that I got to work. I got to leave the country. I can't keep walking the dogs. Some of you remember Happy, our longtime Great Pyrenees. Even she was getting sick of walking. I mean, she had like given me size. She was like, Great Pyrenees, all they do is walk. And even she was like, this has got to stop. And so I had for many years an idea for a methodology that I wish I had taken when I was in business school, because my perception, you know, when I hear myself introduced as like this amazing acclaim, blah, 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 I want to die because it's just so not true. Like, my perception inside me of my life is I made a lot of boneheaded mistakes. I took a lot of detours. I got fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, I've had a lot of, like, yeah, okay, the credentials are the credentials, but like, I don't have that. I invented myself like everyone else, like a messy mess ball bouncing along. And some things worked and some things didn't. But I wish that I had had sort of a theory of what my life should have been, because I would have avoided some really dumb mistakes. So I had started developing a construct, a methodology that I kind of wanted to see if it worked, and I started trying it. I invented a lot of it here on Nantucket. And then finally, I felt like the methodology itself was in a place where I might teach it. And this was kind of, I actually, one of the key parts of it that I was really essential, I actually had my daughter Eve, I said to her, can you get 30 people your age in this living room? I'll have pizza. And she said, I can do that. And they all came over, and I tried this one part of it, which is now Value Solitaire. Some of my students are here, and they've all played Value Solitaire. Yep. And I saw that how well it worked. So I went to the dean at NYU Business School, who I had known through life and business, and I said, I think I have this class called Becoming You, named by my son Roscoe, and I think it's a class that might help business school students figure out a way forward that's less, that has less optionality around boneheaded mistakes. I think that was like the fancy word I used. I basically would screw up less. And he said, well, let's try it as a small experiment. And, but here's the thing, if you take a class called Becoming You, Crafting the Authentic Life You Want to Need, and you put it in the course catalog for a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds, what happens? It was not an experiment very long. The first semester, 80 students took it. Then the wait list was like 800 students, and they were like, hey, how'd you like to join the faculty? And I was like, yes. Okay, so there was no grand plan to it, but when they offered it, I mean, I was sitting at my computer when the dean called me to ask, and I burst into tears, and they were the first happy tears since Jack died. I mean, I had remembered, like, when my granddaughter was born, crying because he was not going to see her. But I cried and I was really happy. And then I was off to the races. I started teaching management. I started doing a lot of other things. They were wonderful and created an institute for the continuing study of this stuff. And so it all makes sense, okay, in reverse. But this methodology kind of, I continued to change it, and as I taught hundreds and hundreds of students, continued to evolve it, and then next thing you know, oops, there's a book.
There's a book and there's a PhD. And so what's amazing about this book and her class, which I was very lucky to take, is that it's really very rigorously researched. It's not as simple as, some other sort of sayings that go out there and people write books about that. There's real sort of intent and methodology behind it. And it starts with this idea of the 3 Ds. In terms of understanding why this methodology is necessary.
Yeah, so my theory, and it's not, I mean, people have said the same theory in different ways, is that there's 3 different ways to live, and they all start with D. So the first D is default. We live by default. We just are reactive. We sort of bounce around, something happens, we react the best we can, and frankly, guilty as charged. I lived like that for decades. That's sort of like if you've got children, you often live just by default. But it's exhausting. And you make a lot of mistakes when you're living just by default. Then the second D is deliberation, where you sort of start to sprinkle some intentionality on how you live, and you start to say, yeah, but I kind of know who I am, and I kind of know where I'm going, and I'm going to try to follow that as best I can. But the third D, which is sort of the work of our life, is design and living by design, where we have a true theory of ourselves. We know our values, which almost no one knows their values. We know our aptitudes, somewhat larger percentage. I've researched that would suggest that this is true. Know what our true aptitudes are, and then we know what our economically viable interests are, and that we actually have a theory of what our purpose is, and we make decisions according to it. Now, a lot of things get in the way of living by design. I call them the 4 horsemen of values destruction, and they gallop in and gallop off with your life. And because I'm a teacher now, they all start with E, so that the youth will remember them. But they are expectations. Society's expectations, your own expectations, your parents' expectations, culture's expectations. I can't do that because it would just go against everyone's expectations. Expedience. Just easier to do something, just easier not to do the hard thing that would get you to your purpose. Events, I was a person who my values were trampled by events, and I just let my true values drift away from me. I finally went and got them again. And finally, the economic security, which is real. You got to pay the rent, you've got to pay tuitions, there's real economic demands on us. But very unfortunately, just to sum up, are there any behavioral economics people in this audience? I'm about to sum up the entire field in one sentence, so forgive me if you're a behavioral economist. But basically what it says is that we will make decisions based on economic reasons, even if money is not important to us. That's how we act. And so people will take jobs, buy houses, and live in certain places for financial reasons, and then like 40 years later, it will be like that Talking Head song. You wake up and you say, what is this beautiful house? My God, what have I done? And so the whole purpose of becoming you, understanding how hard it is to get you to a place where you know your values, and you know your aptitudes, and you know your economically viable interests. At the intersection would be your purpose, and you try to get on the path there.
I think that so not only is your methodology sort of understandable but rigorously researched, but it's also a challenge to everybody, and it's sort of your call to people to be like, you know what, you could be living a life with meaning. You could be living your life with purpose. And you just sort of talked about it, but if you were to visualize it as that Venn diagram.
Yes. It is like a Venn diagram. Values, aptitudes, and economically viable interests. These are 3. I was speaking at MIT recently, and I loved referring to it. These are 3 data sets, okay? They are 3 data sets. What your values are, what your aptitudes are, and what your economically viable interests are. So economically viable interests, that's the work that calls you emotionally or intellectually, but also pays you the amount that you're you need and want to be paid, okay? For some people, that's very little, and so for some people, it's not. Aptitudes are your cognitive hardwiring. It's sort of, are you a generalist or a specialist? Are you a future focuser or present focuser? Are you a brainstormer or an idea contributor? There's 8 big cognitive aptitudes. They're pretty stable from when you're 15 years old on. And then there's your emotional aptitudes, and that would be your personality, okay? Because sometimes you're very good at a job because of your personality, and sometimes you're very bad at a job because of your personality, okay? And then there's your values. So values are hard. There's a lot of layers between us and our values, and values are complicated. So values are not virtues. This is the first thing when you ask people, what are your values? They say kindness, fairness, integrity, and those are all beautiful things, but those are virtues. And virtues are social and cultural constructs that we all agree we need more of. Okay, well, most people agree we need more fairness and honesty and integrity. Values are choices around how we make our actions and decisions in the world. And there's several different values inventories. I could just nerd out on you, but I happen to like mine, which has got 15 values in it, and it's about, like, let me give you an example. Scope. Okay, this is the name of one of the values, and this is the choice about how big and exciting a life we want, or down at the other end of the continuum, how controlled, contained, and predictable a life we want. This is a choice about how we show up in the world. And so my contention is that there are 15 of these, I could list them all, values, and we are somewhere along the continuum with how much of that value we have. But here's the thing. We can really have a value. We can have a value scope that's off the charts. I want to travel. I want to meet new people. I want to have excitement all the time. I want to be Bianca Jagger on the back of a stallion going into Studio 54. I want that every day of my life. That's very, very high scope. And then lower scope, well, I don't know who else is addicted to TikTok like I am, but on TikTok, there's a whole vertical for people who love lower scope. And it goes, I like this little life. And then the Brooklyn hipsters put up pictures of their children in pinafores, okay? And it's very, very twee, contained. All 4 of my children have low scope. I don't judge anybody's values. Everyone has a right to whatever values they have. But we can have a value of a certain level and not express it at all. So I have a good friend who has very, very high scope, but because of her husband and a bunch of other things, she lives in a small town in Vermont and never gets to express her scope. And that gap between how much of a value you have and how much you're expressing it is something that I've been studying. It's what I wrote my PhD thesis on, and we actually have a test for it. I mean, you took the test, right? They have a test called the Values Bridge. It tells you your values 1 through 15 rank, and it tells you every single gap you have on every single value. This was a thing that was not on my bingo card 5 years ago, but somehow became the #1 thing on it. Because I was teaching, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll breathe. Because I was teaching my students about values, and I thought there is a need for this measurement tool, so I went in search of it, and I found other values tools that were very judgmental. For instance, there's a value in the land today, which is self-care, which is taking care of yourself, which is flourishing, which is tenderness towards yourself. And the other values inventories that exist call this value hedonism. They do. Okay? The 2 standard values. So I was like, no. That's not what it is. It's something else. So I gave it the Greek name, eudaimonia, for flourishing. But and so actually, just data point, 15,000 people have now taken this test, and in Gen Z, 75% have that as their #1 value. As the generations go down, it goes down like that, but.
I think that the Values Bridge is a really, really helpful tool, and it's a helpful language that you're giving people in terms of understanding each other. And so you talk about how you teach this to younger people, but you also teach it to people of all ages. And as a person of all ages, one of the things I really appreciated about it was a framework that helped me understand my sister versus me. And what's also really beautiful about it is that there is no value that is right or wrong or good or bad.
That's the difference with virtues, okay?
Yeah.
All virtues are good. That society agrees. But values, right. And this is a very interesting thing. I guest lectured at Stanford, and after teaching the values bridge, a student came up to me and she said, you know what you're doing, it sort of reminds me of that Wittgenstein quote. I was like, do tell. And she said, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And imagine if we have this language, like I say to my kids all the time, when they work less than I did, I say, I guess I have much higher work centrism than you do, and you have lower work centrism, and this stops me from saying, I wish you would work more, it drives me out of my mind, and you know, all the things that we usually say about values. You shouldn't be judging other people's values, and they shouldn't be judging you. I mean, wouldn't the world be a better place if we stopped judging each other's values? Virtues is another thing.
It's why I just want to underline just what a helpful language it is in terms of understanding. And when you are sort of in conflict, and this is why people have been asking Suzy to do this for couples, because like I think a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of sort of cross words are that you just don't value this in the same way that I do, and that sort of understanding across different relationships and how people work.
I want to just note, this is very dangerous to do with couples, which I learned the hard way. When I was first beginning to test the test, which is now a digital test, which you can take, when I was first starting to test it was on pieces of paper like this. And my first people who took it were my wonderful, wonderful colleagues in the Management and Organizations Department at NYU Business School. And I invited my colleagues from my entire department over with their partners for dinner. And after dessert, I said, surprise! I have a little test I'd love you to take. I'm just doing some research. And they were like, are you kidding? I was like, oh, but I fed you and I liquored you up. Let's do it. And then what happened is they would take the test and they would get their results. And they would see that their values were ranked very differently, but also the test aggregates your gap on every single value, and at the end it sort of says, hey, you're very, very close to living your authentic life. You're a thresholder or you're an approacher. And then if you have huge gaps on every value, you're like an incongruent or discordant. There's all these like scary names. And then there was always couples sitting there and like one spouse would be transcendent, like living their full life, and the other spouse would be like discordant, and then there would be like this awkward silence, and I'd be like, okay, I'm not doing this at any more parties. But it is very revealing, and it does have a wonderful application. I mean, couples therapists have approached me about using it in their practices because it does quickly surface. And when we put the tool out in the world, we went back and forth on this, and we finally agreed to have a functionality where you check a box, and if your partner or child or whatever checks the box, your values do come up next to each other, and you get to see that work. So.
There are so many exciting applications of this, and in terms of understanding. So first of all, you're going to get Suzy's book, and all of these values are really well explained and contextualized there. And then she also has this wonderful podcast where this great conversational nature that you're hearing here is on her podcast, and it's free everywhere podcasts are. And it's just such a joy to listen to because, again, as you're studying and understanding this new vocabulary in terms of and framework of approaching the world and approaching your friends and colleagues, she contextualizes all of it, and there are guest appearances by Sophia, who's my favorite.
That's right. So every now and again, I draw my daughter into service to be on the podcast with me. But thank you.
So one of the things that was and I've talked about this with you, that the exercises that I thought was really helpful, which is easy and you don't need a book or paper to do it, is the whose life do you want anyway? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So. I use a lot of exercises to help people excavate their values. It kind of separates them. I have to sometimes trick people into finding their values because so many identity issues get involved. For instance, I'll ask people what their values are, and they almost immediately put family at the top. There's a lot of societal pressure to say family. Later, when they go through all the exercises, family may not be at the top. And so one of the exercises that I use is called Whose Life Do You Want Anyway? And its source is my oldest son, Roscoe, who had a wonderful, spectacular academic career at Stanford. And then he came home and he made a gigantic mistake, which is he took a consulting job. Of course, smart kid who had no idea what he wanted to do, went into consulting, of course, basically to shut me and Jack up because we were saying get a job. Then he made a gigantic mistake. He moved home to live with me and Jack so we could watch him consulting. And he was going in late and coming home early, and we said, you're going to get fired, you're going to get fired. And guess what? He got fired. The day he got fired, he came home and he said, you'll never believe what just happened. And we were like, actually, we told you this was going to happen. And I was mad at him. It was not my finest moment as a mother. There's a lot of competition for those moments, but this was not my finest moment. And I was so mad at him, I screamed at him, whose life do you want anyway? And he was able to answer instantly. And that answer was the door that opened to him living this beautiful life that he and his wife and children now have. So I would say that I do this with my students where they have to list all the people's lives who they want. There's a column where you list all the reasons why. And I would say in mine, I would have to say that Tina Silverman, who's sitting right here, is in my whose life would you want anyway, and I list all the reasons why. And then you have to, then there's a column where you can leave out what you would leave out from that person's life, because nobody could do this if you had to completely swap lives with somebody. And what this does is when you do it for enough people, you will see patterns. Like I've had students come in and say, I'm definitely going into banking. I love everything about banking. I love the instruments. Okay. All right, some people love financial instruments. They love the instruments. And then you look at their whose life chart, and every single person is an entrepreneur. And you think, well, what's going on here? So you do look for these patterns. You did it. Did you have fun doing it?
I did, and Suzy was on my list of people I admire. And here's what I said I really liked about her life. I said that I loved that she was living her values. I loved that she had was able to reinvent herself in multiple ways. And I loved how she has a beautiful relationship with her children. Those are three things that I admire. And the thing that I did not want was New York City. I could not take that. I have no desire.
I love New York.
And I think that if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about Roscoe, because I think that was just that moment where he was living by default and he was living based on expectations.
Even worse, he was just living because, look, let me say this. It is better to be the author of your life than the editor. And we spend a huge amount of time in our life with the pen not in our hand, letting people edit our life. And one of the things we do as parents is we edit our kids' lives. Or we try, and I had been trying to edit his life. And so that moment when he said, okay, here's what he said. This is a kid, fancy education, da-da-da, and in consulting, and Jack and I were like, yes, just consult harder, keep consulting, because it was meeting our needs. When I asked him, whose life do you want? He said the name of the guy who owned and ran his summer camp, Kiev. I'm sure there's Kiev families in this room. And I said, wow. Henry Kennedy? Like, this was not what I wanted to hear. And he said, yeah, he owns a camp. He's with kids all the time. He's outside constantly. He's in Maine. No one tells him what to do. He owns it. And I was like, oh my God. So I also said to him, okay, if that's what you want, because when he finally said something that I understood, he had none of my values. And now, our lives changed when I understood what his values were. My number one value is cosmos, which is my relationship with God, but my number two value is work-centrism. I would work nonstop every minute of every day. I love work for work's sake. Ever since I was a little girl, I loved work. I wanted to work all the time. And work-centrism is a very low value for him. He actually has many other values that are not mine, but it doesn't mean I can't love him more than life. I do. And now that I understand how different our values are, so he went and worked for Henry Kennedy. He was going to take a month off. That didn't fly. I was standing over him. He called Henry Kennedy, went and worked for him, and it began to open up what he was and what he really wanted to do. And now he does marketing for Dungeons and Dragons, for the game Dungeons and Dragons. He's living his purpose completely. So it was a journey to get there and understanding what his values truly were.
I think one of the values that this room will especially resonate with is the value of place.
Yeah.
Can you explain that one?
Yeah, so all values inventories leave out what I think is one of the most essential values in the entire values lexicon, and that is the value of place, where you want to be. How did this come to me? Well, I would go through the Becoming You process with my students, and they would say, that's it. I have to, if you look at my values, and you look at my aptitudes, and you look at my economically viable interests, without a doubt, I must be an MLB scout, okay? I must do X, Y, and Z. And I say, that's fantastic. We've discovered that's exactly what you must do. And then they would say, yeah, but I've got to live in Albuquerque because my wife's family, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's no teams in Albuquerque, right, or whatever it was. And I was like, wait. And everything you're doing has to be in Albuquerque? And he goes, yeah, I've really committed. I'm going to live in Albuquerque. We're going to raise our children there. And I was like, but that's a value, living in that place then. And so I actually started to incorporate place in. Now, some people, if you have high place And sometimes this is people's number one value. If you have a high place, it means there is one place you have to live or you feel like you're in a suit that's the wrong size. All right? For my daughter Eve, that is Nantucket. She cannot live anywhere else. And it's wonderful. She found her happy place at a very young age. Other people are like digital nomads, and they don't care where they live. And in fact, living in one place would feel like they were in the wrong suit. They got to move all the time. Jack was a little bit that way. Jack could just go anywhere. He just sort of had wanderlust. He loved living in a lot of different places. So if you have high place as a value, it means there's one place that's really central to you. And if you are lower in place, it means you have a kind of different physical flexibility.
I think that all of us here on Nantucket have a very high sense of place. I'm going to turn it over to questions. Somebody's going to come with a microphone. And while we're waiting for that to happen, you talked about the 4 premises, and one of them you already named, which is it is better to be the author of your own life, which is such a really concise way of saying it. Do you mind going over the other?
Yeah, so I would say that it's better to be the author of your life than the editor, and I would just sort of add that little bit there, and with no shade to editors. I mean, as editor on my tax returns, editors are great people, but we can give the editor's pen over to other people, and that's a lifelong challenge to put that pen in our own hand. I think that there are some of the other premises that sort of like where I go into Becoming You with is that that life is incredibly long and incredibly short at the same time. I think we've all experienced that. It goes by very fast and it goes by very slowly, and we sort of have to keep that paradox in our mind at all times. I think that, because my work involves people figuring out who they are, I've sort of had to toy with like what is human nature and what are we here for, and the place I land is that, first of all, that no one can know that, but also that people are very, very complicated and very simple. There are some sort of simple human needs, but everyone else is, like me, including me, is just a messy mess ball. And that's what has to be acknowledged and celebrated. And I think one of the reasons that I have a comfort level with Becoming You is because it acknowledges and accepts the fact that what I'm asking people to do with this process is incredibly hard and incredibly complicated and incredibly messy. There's nothing simple about figuring out who you are. It's the work of our lives. We can get better at it. That's sort of what I'm saying, and we can get better at it with some of these tools that I hope that are in the book. But there's nothing simple about this. This is just a big fat mess.
And then you have hope deferred.
Oh yeah, this is a daring thing that I put a Bible verse up in class, and it basically what it says is that hope deferred can make the heart sick. It's in Proverbs, but a dream fulfilled is the tree of life. Thank you. Is the tree, but a dream fulfilled is the tree of life. And so look, we all defer hope sometimes. We do. Because people get sick or kids go off the rails. I mean, this kind of thing happens. But then there's this moment where you are living your dream of a life, and it is like a tree. It keeps growing. Your heart grows. You feel exquisitely alive. It's worth not giving up on. That's worth not giving up on.
All right. Who has a question?
This is fascinating. Suzy, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if there are any truisms for people who are trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, when they're closer to retirement age than just starting out.
Thank you for that great question. One of the wonderful things that NYU did, I went to NYU and I was frustrated because students came to me and they said, after they took the class, and they said, my mom needs to take this, or my partner needs to take it. And then I was at an academic conference and I was talking to Leslie Perlow, who's the professor at Harvard, who teaches the equivalent, Harvard Business School teaches the equivalent of Becoming You. And she told me offhandedly that when students take their equivalent of this class at HBS, their spouses get to take it with them. And I became mad and jealous. Because I think that your values often exist in an ecosystem. And so I approached NYU and I said, look, can we teach this in open enrollment so people's families can take it? And they said yes. And that's how Linda and all my wonderful friends here took it. They came to NYU and I teach it in 3 days. But guess who comes to this class? People who are about to enter their 3rd chapter. I mean, I had the number of people who are over 40, 50, approaching 60, who are like, yeah, I did this. Now I want to know what I should do with this 3rd chapter. I'm healthy, I'm alive, my kids are gone, I've got more freedom than I've ever had. What's next? And for them, I kind of love teaching them the most because they bring the wisdom of their years. and they can apply it. And I mean, I think it's major. I mean, in many ways, it's in some ways, my young students who think life will go on forever and ever, and it's lost on them a little bit. And that the older you are, the more you can bring to it. So I think it's a really rich time to do it, is when you are saying, okay, I did a lot of stuff for a lot of people. And I don't have any, I'm not sorry I did it. I'm not sorry I did it. I'm not sorry I did all this stuff for my children, my husband. I would do it exactly the same. But now I can do some stuff for me. Who am I? What do I want to do? I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I have been up at the beginning of class. I just did my podcast with one of the students, and there's this moment where I start saying essentially this, and people just start crying. I think it's just very, you're like, oh God, I actually can start to live by design, but I don't even know where to start because I forgot who I was. And so.
You're giving people permission.
Yeah.
Dawn over here. Hi, Dawn. Dawn was a speaker yesterday at the festival. She's an amazing author. We're so excited you're here. Thank you, Dawn.
I'm thrilled to be here, and
Thank
this is fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Just so exhilarating. I would love you to talk. You mentioned that time can move very quickly, that life can move very quickly, and it can also move very slowly. And that paradox, and how important it is to hold that. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about what that means to hold that and to live it.
Yeah.
Yes?
We hold so many paradoxes nonstop. I almost think that is the human condition, is we are just holding them. And I will say that one of the reasons I wanted to, or why I felt impelled to create my own values assessment tool, was that the ones that exist currently that were available to me as a professor actually technically don't allow you to hold conflicting values. So that if you hold a value of high achievement, the actual machinery of the assessment tool does not allow you to hold high family centrism at the same time. And I thought, like, wait, that's the story of my life. And that's the story of everybody's life, is that we hold values that are extremely different at the same time. I mean, the most popular podcast and the most listens that I've ever had was the one where I was talking to one of the listeners who basically said, I've been a mom, my children, I'm a mother of 8th grader and a 9th grader, and I have had the job of my dreams. I'm a museum administrator. I can't take it anymore. It's too hard. And then she did her values bridge, and her number one value was work centrism, then achievement, then family centrism. It's exhausting to hold these values at the same time. And yet, what choice do we have? Well, we can suppress and sublimate the value. She wanted to quit. I urged her not to. Eventually, your children go away. You young mothers, they do leave. And so I said, to hang in there. You've got a few more years of this very difficult stuff. But every day, we wake up and we, and for Game of Thrones fans here, we're like Daenerys. We just put on our armor and we try to slay the dragon of this paradox. But I think the beauty of the language is that we understand that these are two values that are in conflict, and we have to navigate them. And so the funny thing is, my students often, because they're in their 20s, their number one value is that one I mentioned, eudaimonia, which is self-care, joy, more recreation and leisure. And guess what their number two value is? It's affluence. They want to be rich. And so they come up and they'll say, is this a problem? And I'm like, maybe, but you're going to spend the next 40 years working that one out, and you're going to make some decisions along the way. And so I think that when we are holding the paradox of life being long and short, and of people being complicated and simple, including ourselves, I think it's what it's reflecting is just the sort of complexity of humanity in our lives. It's just there's just that's what we do.
Great question, Dawn. Thank you. Back there.
I'm so glad you're talking about values, and I don't think we talk about enough.
There you are. Okay.
So thank you for talking about values, but I feel like, especially the young people, come with preconceived notions of what they think in the world, and there seems to be a lack of curiosity about somebody else's ideas or whatever. So if you're trying to instill values into a young person, don't you have to instill curiosity, or what would be your suggestion on how to let them travel that road to values?
Well, curiosity is an aptitude, so it's not really a value. So, and look, we can all agree curiosity is a great thing, but there's actually, for sheer curiosity, there's thought to be a gene, that, this is the sort of latest research, I guess, that is showing that a lot of it, and look, if you have several children, one could be very curious and one's not very curious. I try to instill in my students this sense that it's important to be current, but it's hard. If they're not curious, they're not curious. There's a value that sort of reflects curiosity, which is scope, that first value I meant. I have a friend with very high scope, and she says, I want to touch everyone's brains. But I think that, she just wants new experience, wants to meet new people, and she's got this very vivacious personality that kind of is aligned. I think that there is so much about Gen Z. I mean, I'm with them day in and day out in the classroom, and every time they say something that is blows my mind, I try to breathe through it, and I say, I was young once, I was young once. They do come preloaded. I mean, the one thing that they come preloaded with that's kind of hard for me, because it's not my experience, is that they don't love work very much, and they don't trust work. One time I had a partner from McKinsey in, and we were talking, she was an expert in one particular thing in my management class, and she was younger than I was, but we were chit-chatting away, and at one point she said offhandedly, well, management, it's just an act of love. I said, yeah, I know, blah, 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 blah. And then we looked, and the whole audience was the whole class was hands up, love has nothing to do with work. And my feeling is I've made some of my best friends at work. And so there are attitudinal things that are very real. And it creates a great deal of complexity that we have to, as people who are managing younger people, have to face into each day. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but I tried.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your book. I found it incredibly enlightening.
Thank you.
You spoke about SIPOs, so super early potential opportunities.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
I'm so into space mining. Okay, so look, let me talk about what SIPOs are. So there's a part of the Becoming You methodology which basically says, let's open the aperture on what kind of jobs exist. Research would say that when you come out of high school, you know about 5 jobs. This is excellent research done at the University of Chicago. High school students know about 5 jobs, and 2 of those jobs belong to their parents. And then there's the other jobs they can see, like nurse and construction worker, whatever. Then you think, oh, in college, they're going to learn about a lot more jobs. But in college, groupthink starts. And people just start saying, I got to get a job, I'm going to tech. And then, God forbid, you should go to graduate school. Then you're really getting on the conveyor belt. Okay, you go to business school, consulting or banking, all right? And so what I do in this part of the methodology is I say, hey, guess what? There's 135 industries. And there's lots of different types of jobs in all of those industries. But I also teach about megatrends. This is when my students' heads hit the desk and their drool goes on their chin. That nobody likes megatrends for some reason, but megatrends, which are the really big, exciting trends coming down the road, SIPOs, super early economic possibilities, are like, AI was a megatrend once. All right, and so the one that I'm really interested in and very excited about is space mining. There is technology that we could probably get 90% of the minerals that we need in space. This is a very big early megatrend, but if we do, think about what would happen in terms of the harm to the earth and to animals. We could move that all up to places where there is no earth or animals, and I think that makes me very excited. Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time on the values, but the aptitudes and the economically viable interests are the other circles on that Venn diagram. So thank you all so much for being a great audience. You had terrific questions. And again, it really is just so beautiful to be together, to share space and think and learn and hear from this incredible Nantucketer, Suzy Welch, Dr. Suzy Welch.
Thank you.